Welcome back. This is performance test workshop number 2. Make it stop. Hello everyone, I'm Ann Wells, and this is segment 2 of the Bar Winners Performance Test Workshop. Today's the second segment of the performance test. We'll be talking about the performance test based on the case called TP Campground that I'm going to be using for examples. So again, hopefully you have all worked your way through that before you're watching today's lecture, or workshop, I guess. So, reminder for you all as we approach it, that the performance test tests your ability to read a problem, think it through, and apply the law from a closed universe library in the format that they request. As we talked about last time, the key is organization and timing. The more practice you do, the better you become at it. Last time we talked about creating 2 documents, a roadmap, which is the structure of everything that you're going to write, and then the outline of everything in the file that you're going to need in your roadmap. We're going to do that again. We're going to roadmap and outline at least portions of the TP Campground case. But before we do that, I want to just remind you or review some of the general timing and strategy for apportionment of the various tasks. Again, we're talking about an hour-and-a-half performance test. Of that hour-and-a-half or 90 minutes, approximately 45 minutes of it is allocated to writing your response. But that also means that the first 45 minutes are spent in the pre-writing categories. That includes organizing and outlining on a really preliminary basis for about 5 minutes. Then you're going to read and outline the library, read and outline the file, and then you're going to take those outlines and turn them into your roadmap. And that process is about 40 minutes of the hour-and-a-half period. So again, the important thing to note is that you are spending a significant portion of your time in the reading and outlining, and then the balance of the time writing. So let's talk about these different stages. Again, the first step is what we call the pre-writing, organizing, and outlining stage. And this consists of really 3 steps: skimming the table of contents and the general instructions, reading and road mapping the task memo and the format instructions, and then a really quick skim of the file. The most important of these steps, I think, is the task memo, and we'll talk about that in detail again. But that's the pre-writing stage. So this stage is not very long, and again, you need to be disciplined. You're just trying to get the lay of the land. You're not reading at anything in the file at this point other than the task memo. So step number 1 is skim the table of contents and the general instructions. So let's do that for the TP Campground case. If you look at the table of contents, the file has what appears to be a fair number of documents in it. A memorandum to applicant and the notice to abate, which are the task memo, and then it's got approximately 6 or 7 other documents, including, it appears, newspaper articles, a conditional use permit, a letter, and traffic assessment, among other things. Then you'll quickly flip to the library, and when you do that, you will see that the library in this case has selected statutes and 1 case. So that's now you know the universe of what you're going to be looking at. So now we'll take it to the next level. Let's look at the instructions. As I've said before, the instructions are likely to be the same each time for each performance exam, but they are important and they do contain some general information that's important to look at. So again, briefly, if you look at the instructions here, I'm going to highlight just a couple of things. Again, paragraph number 2 notes that the problem is set in the fictional state of Colombia, one of the United States. That tells you the jurisdiction. And again, that's important because not all the library not every case in the library is necessarily going to be from Colombia. And if it's not, then that should trigger in your analysis that it's persuasive and not binding. So, in fact, in this particular problem, the case that they give you, if you look at the table of contents for the library, it says it's Tall Timbers Resort versus Oregon Construction Department, which would appear to be an Oregon case, not a Columbia case. So again, that should trigger that it's persuasive, not binding. If you miss that, by the way, you're going to head down the wrong path as far as some of your analysis goes. So this is kind of a heads up to make sure that you are always looking at the jurisdiction just to be sure. So again, I would also point out number 5, the last sentence of paragraph number 5 says, in citing cases from the library, you may use abbreviations and omit page citations. Again, don't waste time doing full cites or internal page cites. For this, you don't have time to do things that they don't give you any points for. So make sure that you follow the instructions on that. Number 7 also notes, gives you a guideline on apportioning your time, and it says you should probably allocate at least half the time to reading and organizing before you begin preparing your response. So again, the bar has given us some guidelines that are in line with what we've been talking about, which is 45 minutes for reading, outlining, preparing your arguments, and then 45 minutes for actually writing it. So again, it took me a couple minutes to go through this with you. You're going to be reading it much more quickly than the time I just spent on it. However, the next step is to read the task memo or the instruction memo. Here it's called the memorandum to applicant. It's pretty short. Take a look at it for just a moment. Even though it's 2 paragraphs long, I can tell you that that it tells us at least 4 important things. So, again, with the task memo, you always want to pay attention to what they're asking you to do, and if relevant, what they're telling you not to do. Okay? You always want to follow the instructions as far as the task memo goes. So this task memo tells us 4 things. Okay? Actually, it tells us a little bit more than that. It tells us that you're an attorney at a law firm representing a client who owns and operates a campground and was sent a notice to abate. The notice to abate is the next document in here that you have to read in conjunction with the task memo. But initially we know, okay, we have a client who's being told to abate, which you probably may remember from property means notice to change or remove conditions on property. So the important part of the task memo really starts with paragraph number 2, and the first thing it says is draft an objective memorandum that discusses and analyzes the charges made in the notice to abate. So that tells us 2 things. One, it's an objective memorandum, not persuasive, not one-sided. It means evaluate both sides of the argument. And then it says discuss and analyze the charges made in the notice to abate. The charges made in the notice to abate is going to be what your issues are. We'll look at the notice to abate in just a minute, but it's starting to frame what your document is going to look like. Then the next thing it says is evaluate our chances of prevailing. Also take into consideration arguments likely to be made by the county. In other words, they are saying discuss counter arguments. When it says take into consideration arguments likely to be made by the county, that means discuss counter arguments. Finally, and this is an important one, again, along the lines of you don't have time to go down the wrong path, this says a separate statement of facts is not necessary. Use your facts in the analysis. Okay, so this is an objective memorandum, which normally would include a statement of facts if you're going on the general sort of memorandum format. But this task memo is specifically telling you, do not write a statement of facts. It's not necessary. That's important. Again, you won't get points for it. You don't have time to do it. You don't need it. Don't do it. So that's the preliminary from the task memo. But as I said before, in order to get the complete issue here, we need to look at the notice of abatement. As your task is to discuss the charges in the notice of abatement. So we need to look at that to frame our roadmap. So take a look at the notice to abate. Take a moment to look at it and see what it tells us. Right? What does it tell us? Okay, first, and we already know this, our client owns and operates a campground. This notice of abatement refers to something called recreational park trailers, okay, RPTs. And the issue that it gives us is it says, she's ordered to remove all RPTs because these RPTs violate the statute and that they're permanent structures. Okay, so the big issue is going to be, for our purposes, whether these recreational park trailers or RPTs are or are not permanent structures. Remember, think about who you represent and how that frames the issue. Our client received a notice from the county saying you have to remove RPTs because they're permanent structures. So what's her argument going to be? Her argument is going to be they're not permanent structures, therefore they don't have to be removed. So we don't really know at this point what the structures, what we're going to say they are. But we know that the other side is arguing that they're permanent structures. So this essentially looks like it's going to break down into a two-sided argument. The The county is arguing that RPTs are permanent structures or buildings, or RPTs are not buildings. And we're gonna, that kind of begs the question, we're gonna argue that there's something else. And you're gonna see, when you read just a little bit further, that we're gonna argue that they're RVs, recreational vehicles, not buildings. So just from reading the notice of abatement and the task memo, this is where it leaves us for the roadmap. And again, the task memo says take into considerations arguments to be made by the county. So that means that you need to argue both sides. So the preliminary roadmap so far really is an RPT a permanent structure, or is it something else? That's what we need to know so far, or that's what we know so far. And now you're ready to move on to the library. Okay? So with the preliminary roadmap in mind, you can now read the library and outline the law. Remember that your roadmap should inform how you read the statutes and the cases, so you can focus on the most important parts. Again, you don't have the luxury of time for reading these. You don't have a real world time frame on this where you could take a lot of time to sit down and read the cases and digest the file and structure your argument. What the performance exam is testing is your ability to do those things, but to do them very quickly. So you have to be quick and to hone in on what's important from the sources that they gave you. When it comes to statutes, you're going to want to pull out the high points of the statutes. And for the cases, again, you're going to do what I referred to last time as a basic FHR. Facts, holding, reasoning as applicable to your issue. You're not briefing the cases, you're not outlining the cases, you're not adding any extraneous information from the cases. And you can't just, on the other hand though, you can't just underline. You've got to take the information out of the cases and put it on something else, which again is going to be on our sheet here. Because if all you do is underline or highlight, you're going to be flipping back and forth looking for things. So you need to get the information in a succinct way out of the cases, onto this sheet, and then moved on to this is your outline, and then moved on to your roadmap. So you're making notes just of the keywords, of the relevant facts, and the law of the case. Keep the notes short in bullet point format, or just a quick FHR, and think about which issues they relate to. So, what I want you to do now is to take a few moments, turn off the tape, and review the statutes and the cases, and come up, if you haven't already done so, try to come up with your initial outline of the most important parts of those cases. So turn off the tape, turn it back on when you're ready to go. Okay, we're back. So what we're going to do now is take a look at the statutes and the cases, see how they inform our argument, and move on from there. So we know going in, or starting to read the library, that the main issue is whether these recreational park trailers are going to be structures, classified as structures, or are they going to be something else, and in this case, an RV. So when we open up to the library, we start with selected statutes, one page, relatively short, and let's look at them in the context of our issue. The first section is the zoning district regulations, Division 200, where it says the purpose of the article is to establish zoning districts and uses that regulate the type and density of land uses for the county. So these are, then they basically give us the policy behind the next two zoning regulations that we're going to read. So if you'll note, it gives you an A, B, C, and D as the purposes of the article. Essentially what you want to do is come up with a shorter version of each of those. And moving on here to your statute column. Okay, what I would have for here is Division 200, purpose of regs. And I've just shorthanded these to protect community character. Promote housing and business. The third one is promote stability of use. And ensure compatibility with the surroundings, the beauty of the surroundings. Okay. So that's your first. That's the first statute, right? And again, if you're thinking about, and you've got to be kind of thinking about this as you're reading it, of how this is going to relate. Remember, we're trying to advocate for somebody who is putting recreational park trailers into a campground. The county has said, no, you can't do it because these are structures. It's quite possible that we're going to have arguments that come from the purpose of the regulations. Protect the community, protect the community character, promote housing, promote stability, and ensure compatibility. So, again, I mention that because you kind of want to be thinking ahead and actively reading. Okay, don't just mindlessly copy the statute down. Think about, okay, well, let's see where I'm going to go with this. So, we don't know that for sure, but at least that seems like that might be important. So then the second statute we have is 221, which deals with campgrounds. Okay? It says campgrounds use means establishments providing overnight or short-term sites for recreational vehicles, trailers, campers, or tents. Then the second part says it has no permanent structures other than a management office, grocery store, facility, etc. So what I would pull from that is campgrounds have are for overnight or short term. That it's for things like RVs, trailers, tents, and no permanent structures. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of starting to get a sense here. Okay, wait, they've said that apparently what these things that she's putting into the campground, they're construing them as permanent structures rather than RVs, trailers, or tents. So this says no permanent structures unless they are office, grocery store, storage, etc. No permanent other than office, etc. Okay? So, Then it brings us to section 222.2. Okay, take a look at that. What would we pull out of that? Again, until we know more, we don't specifically know what's going to be most important, but it does say that a camping site tells you what can be in a camping site. And it says, includes a pad, with parking, etc. And then it also says, let's see, consists of a adequate parking, campsite, includes a fireplace or a barbecue. Okay, so again, now we're thinking, all right, these are things you're allowed to have in a campsite. I wonder what this RPT has. That's where you should be heading with this. So that's your statute. Okay, that's the first part of your library on that. Then you have, next, you have the Oregon Tall Timbers Resorts versus Oregon Construction Department. Again, the first thing I'm going to say on that is Oregon. And you've got to note the jurisdiction. It's not Columbia. Okay? This is Oregon, so this is persuasive, not binding. So, I mean, you have to keep that in mind. If that case helps your client, it's persuasive, not binding. If it hurts your client, it's persuasive, not binding. You have to figure, but you do have to deal with that. And it's in there for that reason. So, what is the Tall Timbers case about? As you read it, it appears that the Commissioner of the Oregon Construction Department adopted regulations that says RPTs are subject to the construction code. So, I don't know about you, but I'm still kind of wondering what RPTs are. But anyway, RPTs are subject to construction code. And again, that would trigger, essentially, it sounds like the jurisdiction of Oregon decided that if RPTs are subject to the construction code, that they're probably permanent structures. So it's looking like this case, at least initially, might be supporting the position of the county and not our client. So the first couple of things that I pulled out of this case from the first page, and I'm not going to write it all out here, but basically the case now tells us what RPTs are. Right? RPTs are RVs installed in campgrounds, often with decks, sunrooms, etc., used as vacation homes. So they're RPTs are RVs installed with decks, and I think that's important because it makes it sound like they are permanent, used as vacation homes. And second would be constructed with electrical, plumbing, mechanical, etc. Again, I'm just shorthanding it here for our purposes. Your notes will probably be a little bit longer. Okay. Then, if you go to the next page, at the top of the third page, it says the commissioner cited various reasons supporting the idea that RPTs are permanent structures. And I think that this is important because these are probably going to be the arguments that the county's going to make as to why they're permanent structures. So here they said the reason why they are, the reason why they're buildings and not RVs are that they're the same materials as a home. And these again are from the top of the page, and I'm just summarizing them. Same occupancy as a vacation home, and that they have, some of the structures have exterior walls and designed as housing, and so I'd say it's like a house, and with electrical, etc. These are all the reasons why the county thinks they're buildings. Okay? So, and I made this 3A or 3 star so you can track it later. But they're helping us out here in this case because the next paragraph gives you the reasons why. They give you the appellant's argument as to why they're not RPTs. Why reasons RPT are not buildings. And as I'm reading this, your mind ought to be going cha-ching, cha-ching, because this is what you're going to be doing over here, is arguing they are permanent or they're not permanent and they're RVs. So they've given you something to look at. They've given you some factors to look at so that when you read the facts, you can figure out which one of those facts apply, which one of these factors apply to our facts. So so here they're going to say, and this is 4, that it fits the definition of an RV. Okay, so actually here, now we've just confirmed that we're going to be arguing they're RVs and not buildings. That they're not fixed to the ground, that they have a wheel. They're not a structure because they're not fixed to the ground. And unfortunately, though, they do give us a counter argument again, that they don't just accept that we say they fit the RV definition, which, by the way, gives you a little more details, built on a single chassis, less than a certain size, all of those things that you would likely make a note of or make a note of where to find it, because again, when I'm seeing things like built on a single chassis, towable by a light truck, designed not for use as a permanent dwelling, all of those things, I'm going to be thinking, okay, now when we start getting our facts about these, where is it going to fit in there? So, they do then counter, though, that they said that this is, they're saying RPTs, RPTs are RVs designed for permanent installation or designed for installation, and therefore that they're not the same as the RVs that you drive around. So they're not the same. And I would call that 3B down there. And then the court in this case concludes that therefore they are a structure even if they're for temporary residential use. So the state of Oregon case, which is persuasive for us, comes down on the side of that RPTs are more like structures than buildings, or excuse me, more like structures than RVs, and therefore they should be subject to that. So that is it for our law, at least as we're seeing it right now. Right? You've got the Columbia statutes and the case from Oregon. I will tell you that there's something a little bit interesting about the case file here, or the client file, in that, one, there's a large number of documents, and we're going to walk through some of them to kind of get a sense of what you might get from each. But at the moment we don't seem to have a lot of law, although as I said, in fact some of the documents that are in the facts section actually kind of give you some law as well, and you'll see when we go through the what I'm talking about. So so the next step then, after we have this, is to read and do an outline of the client file. Again, you know the issue: should RPTs be classified as RVs or as structures? Now you go through the docs in the client file, and with the idea of pulling out the important and relevant facts to that question. And think about, as you're doing it, which side of the argument, or which argument the facts would support. Again, I said this is an interesting file because the nature of the documents is somewhat different than some of the files you may find in other cases, in that some of the legal arguments are actually discussed in the file documents. So keep an eye out for that. So I want you guys to go offline for now and review some of the documents in the file, and in fact I will point you to the ones that I'd like you to look at, and then we'll come back and analyze them. There's two newspaper articles to start with. They give us some basic background facts that I'll discuss in a minute, but as far as the other, starting with the second newspaper article, think about what they're telling us about this particular issue. So take a look at the, go offline and take a quick look at the second newspaper article, the one dated June 24, 2014, and let's talk about what we're supposed to get from that. Okay, we're back. So, by the way, let's talk first about some of the basic facts from the initial article. One of the things that it does, and that you will have wanted to highlight, is that there is in the initial article there's a description of her RPTs, which are 39 feet and they can be towed by a light trailer or a light truck. And I think she also makes the point that there's no noisy generator, so that they're quiet. Right? When we previously saw the regulations for what is considered an RV in, there was a reference to it in the Timbers case. So it's looking like the RPTs do in fact fit within the definition, or at least size-wise, of an RV. Additional points that are made in there, I think, is that that it would only be short-term. Her intention is for short-term leases, but full all year. Then, actually here. And D, again, she talks about 12 feet. They fit on 12 feet spaces and 390 square feet. Again, they fit within the federal definition. So she says it fits the federal definition of an RV. Okay, that could be important. Then it says the campsite has grills and lawns, which again, under the definition here, would seem to be okay. But when you get to the next description, and it also mentions things like fireplace, hardwood floors, stove, refrigerator, granite counters, etc. Maybe that's important because it makes it seem more like a vacation home than just an RV. No, but you need to note it in case you need it to come up later. So that was essentially what I pulled out of the first article. The purpose of that article was to give you some basic background facts about what we're dealing with as far as the description of these RVs. Okay. I next ask you to take a look at the Eagle article, the second article. And it really helps you. What this one does is it pulls out two arguments for you, or two things that are important to note. Right? The Eagle article states that that the Planning Commission has never decided whether an RPT is a structure. So there's been no decision by this county on an RPT. Okay, so this is essentially something that hasn't been determined yet. So they're telling you there's no binding law on the subject, and that they haven't decided that there are structures. The other point that came out of that, I think, was that she makes a point at the end that the campground right now could be rented long-term. She could rent to long-term RVs right now. Okay. And that, at least on a preliminary run-through, is what I would take out of the Eagle article. So let's move on and take a quick minute to read the 2 pages of the conditional use permit, which is the next document. And I think there's actually a lot of important information in there. that will affect the arguments being made. So take a moment, read it, pick out or highlight the probably 3 or 4 things that seem most relevant, and then we'll talk about them. Okay, we're back. This next document that we're looking at is the conditional use permit application. If you look, this is from TP Campground, and this is the staff findings of the planning department. So it's important to note who this is coming from. This is our client submitted a request to use for a conditional use permit, and this is the response to it. So this is the county's response. It makes a couple of points when you start on, and it frames the issue on the second page, and it asks right out, are RPTs recreational vehicles, RVs, or are they structures? Again, you're going to ching. They're helping to make my arguments for me. So here's what I would highlight from that. And I'm going to go ahead and erase these. You have these on another copy, but I need more room on the facts. So a couple of things of interest here. First thing it says is, and again this is from the county, so this is from the use permit findings. Okay. First thing is the county admits, and I'm continuing the numbers sequentially by the way, that RPTs were not defined or contemplated by the what do they call it? By the land use provisions for the county. The LDR, which is the statute that we've looked at. So right now the county's saying the RPTs weren't defined by the county and they were never contemplated by the statute. So then they go on to say the classification depends on whether it's an RV or a structure, and to date the county building department has not treated them as structures. Okay? So in fact, that's in counterpoint actually to Oregon, where they have been treated as structures. Next, the next point on that they say that the RPTs that fit in federal regs, that fit the federal RV definition, have been treated as vehicles by many states. Okay, again, as I'm reading this, I'm like, okay, good. Now I have another argument. Most states, if it fits as an RV, in the category, most states or many states treat it as an RV. That's going to go over here, just by way of foreshadowing. And lastly, it makes a point that it does say that RPTs are hauled or moved to they're towed in, but permanently installed. And that doesn't necessarily help us, does it? That makes it look like it could be a building. Okay? So, that's what we got out of that, out of this letter. We've picked up some more arguments. Okay, so take a moment now. The next document is, it looks like a short one-page document dated April 2014, and it's to the county commissioners from the director of the building department. Take a moment and read that, and let's see what we can glean from that document. Okay, we're back. This county memo, which I'm calling document number 4. Again, the first two documents being the newspaper articles, and the third document is the permit. Now we have a one-page document from the county commissioners. But there's a lot of information packed into this one as well. I came up with four different things that could arguably be important. The first is an admission again that the county has no regs for. The county has no building code provisions for RPTs. Has no building code for RPTs or RVs. Next, the next thing that jumped out at me is that RPTs are not, according to the Manufactured Housing Department, RPTs are not being regulated as manufactured housing. Manufactured housing means mobile homes, homes that are permanently installed. So if you didn't know that, that may have made this a little bit unclear, but that's what they're getting here, is that RPTs are not regulated as manufactured housing. Again, so they're not being regulated as buildings, and they're not being regulated as manufacturing or housing codes by the feds. Again, not binding, but could be helpful to us. Then they go on to say, if the commission decides that the RPTs are structures, then the course of the full building code would have to be applicable. The full code applies. Probably a reason why we don't want it to apply. Okay, and lastly, and I think that this one might be important for our argument, last paragraph says, in opinion of the Tehama County Building Department, RPTs pose less of a risk to the public than a conventional RV and should not be subject to anything that we wouldn't otherwise be willing to require of other trailers, motorhomes, etc. So this is important. We've got the county building department saying, and again I'm going to shorthand here, don't regulate RPTs any different than RVs. So we've got our own county saying don't regulate it as a building, and Oregon saying, we want to regulate it. So this is just the opinion of the county. Okay? But again, a factor in our favor. Okay. So we have a couple more documents, and I think it's important to look at. By the way, if you're doing this and working on it like this, some of your categories are going to maybe go on a second page. Sometimes it's the facts, sometimes it's the cases, but you can see you continue the same format onto several pieces of paper. Again, and these are in the materials for you. You can take a close look at them again. With that being said, I need to make some more space, so I am going to get rid of the statutes just for explaining purposes and use this space as additional facts. So, the next document in the file is a letter to the commissioners, the planning commissioners, from the recreational trailer park industry. So basically this is, again, think about what this is. This is a letter from the National Trade Association representing the manufacturers of these RPTs that are at issue. I'm guessing that they probably don't want them to be considered buildings, but we'll see. Take a moment and read this, and then come back. Okay, we're back. So what can we glean from this association letter, which is doc number 5? I see a couple of things. It does say that RPTs are designed to be temporary living quarters. Okay, because that's something that might help us, again, if it's not permanent, if it's temporary. Then it goes on to say they're usually, the most popular type is 12 foot in width, usually sited in an RV resort or RV park. This is kind of tracks what ours is, which is 12 foot, usually in an RV park. And then finally, they help us make another argument, which is the argument that if you call these structures, then pretty much every RV is going to be considered a structure, and chaos is going to ensue. But the point is that if RPTs are buildings, so are all RVs. And I'm writing chaos just because. So that, I think, are the 3 things that you can glean from that letter. Which brings us to the next couple of ones, which are relatively short. There's a traffic assessment and an air quality assessment. So take a moment, read each of those, and then come up with what we're reading it for. Again, how does this advance our arguments or advance the other side's arguments? Take a moment and read it. So you can turn off the tape. Okay, we're back. So, the traffic assessment, 1 paragraph, what does it tell us? Essentially, it just tells us one thing, that if this campground switches over to RPTs, that the change would reduce the vehicle traffic, and that's a benefit. I'm kind of thinking about the purpose for the zoning regulations back at the beginning, where they said, the ones that I erased from here, but you've got on another sheet, this is probably where this is going to help you address. So, the next the next thing after that is in fact the abstract for the air quality. And what do we find on that? Okay, what we find on that is that it also says that switching over to these RPTs would have a positive impact on fuel consumption and air quality. So again, we've got another benefit. So we have now worked our way through all 7 factual documents. And we have a pretty good idea, I think, of where we are now headed. So, the next step after this, take a deep breath, and this is now the review, outline, and organize stage, where we're taking what we know from here, or from here, this one again is slightly changed, and we're moving it over and structuring the roadmap for our argument. Okay? So, what you're going to do is complete your roadmap with the information from the outline. What I'd like you guys to do now is turn off the tape and take about 10 minutes and start looking at moving information from your outline into your roadmap, and then come back and we'll walk through it. Okay, we're back. So, again, the basic issue we have is whether or not RPTs should be structured as permanent, or as permanent structured and subject to the building code, and therefore our client has to remove them, or whether they are essentially RVs, which are appropriate for a campground. So let's think about where let's look at our statutes and start building some arguments, as well as the Timbers case. So, in fact, we use the Timbers case for the argument that RPCs are installed and should be permanent structures because they're using the same materials and all of those things as regular buildings do. So this is essentially the argument number 3, that they are made like buildings. Okay. Same materials, same walls, etc. They also make the argument that they are like RVs, that they're installed with decks and used with a vacation home. However, one of the things you'll notice from our facts is that ours are in fact different than that, because they don't seem to have permanent decks and all of that. So, okay. So the county's argument is essentially going to rest on the fact that they're going to rely on the Timbers case and the cases and the arguments that were made in regard to that in that case, and that their ultimate argument is going to be that they're designed to be installed. This was argument 3B. and therefore they don't fit, therefore they're permanent. Okay? That's essentially the county's argument in a nutshell. In this particular case, it seems like we've got a lot more arguments in favor of our client, and you could kind of go through them and log them onto here. But it's starting with from timbers actually, and from some other things that they fit the definition of the RV. And that they're not, not fixtures, they're not set to the ground, not fixed to the ground. You're also going to have the information that came from some of the facts. You're going to have that what I have is fact number D, that they fit the federal definition. Okay, and you can also add in the information from that the planning committee has not decided that that the issue's not been decided. That and that as well, that the what we can pull from the use application again is that they weren't defined or contemplated by the local regulations. That they've never been treated as buildings, and these all track the numbers I've given them over here. That they fit the federal, again, they fit the federal definition. That they're not regulated by the government, by the manufactured housing organization, and again that building codes would apply if they are, and that would create all kinds of problems. As well as the opinion of the county that they should be treated as RVs, and then the association that these are in fact temporary, not vacation homes, and also that you've got the benefits of to the environment and to the traffic, and from those I would also cross-reference in some of the statutes and put them where they would fit. So again, I can't replicate this entire outline for you on the board here, but I would urge you to do it on your own. Either using your own outline that you created, or work from the pages that have been provided to you and come up with an argument structure. So again, once you've done that, this is the first 45 minutes of the timing. The balance of the time, once you have set out your arguments here, is you're going to be writing. And again, you want to make sure that you're watching your time. You don't get any credit for pieces of paper with all these wonderful notes on it, or even the structure of your argument here. You need to make sure that they make it onto the paper. And the idea is to convey that you understand what they're asking you to do. As I mentioned the first time in performance workshop number 1, it's better to be just okay and complete than 100% comprehensive on certain issues and unfinished on the rest of them. You really want to get in and get out, hit the highlights, make the major arguments, and move on. And again, you can think about using what's essentially an IRAC approach and your outline. Again, by that I mean you state the issue, state the rule from the statute or the cases, and then apply it to your facts. And again, make sure that you conclude one way or another. Okay? I think that if you look at the sample answers on this, they did structure this as kind of a pro and con argument, rather than just doing this with counter arguments. They address essentially the county is going to argue that RPTs are permanent. Here's all the arguments they're going to make. Our client wants RPTs to be the same as RVs. Here's all our arguments. Then you're gonna come to a conclusion on which one is stronger. But again, you want to make sure that you conclude one way or another on both. Again, pay attention to the form that they're asking you to do, and follow it, and make it look like what they ask you. If this was a memo, then you want to address it to the person who gave you the assignment, which I guess is somebody in this example named Lou Estep. But you want to structure this as a memorandum. So make it look like what they ask you to do. Also, again, another important point is just making it readable. Again, you want headings for your main points. I would also think about breaking longer arguments up into subheadings, and at a minimum, make sure that your separate ideas are in separate paragraphs. You want short, readable paragraphs, not super long one-page paragraphs with the grader's going to get completely lost. You don't want to lose points because the grader skims the beginning or reads the first sentence or two and then skims the rest of the paragraph, thinking you've only made one argument when in fact you've made 3. So each argument deserves its own separate paragraph, even if it's a short paragraph. So again, make it look right, check the template or check the format, make sure to follow the directions, and make it look done. And that means getting in your headings and making sure that you have a conclusion and that you've you've followed the structure as much as you can. So as you've heard before, and I will say again, these performance exams are a lot of work. They're not an easy process to get through, but the more you do them and the more you try to work at this structure, the more second nature it will become to you. Just think about how much better off you will be having done this than if you sit down and look at a performance exam for the first time and have to figure out how to approach it. So with that, I wish you luck on the second one, and we will talk one more time on the third performance workshop, which will be a little bit different because this time we're dealing with a persuasive document to the court, and in fact a closing argument that raises some of its own particular issues. So, all right, that brings us to the end. Thank you.